Have you ever felt like you're doing everything right, living with integrity, staying kind, keeping your heart open, and yet life still finds a way to knock the wind out of you? Like the world is spinning out of control, and you can't tell where you end and the chaos begins? If you have, you're not alone. The truth is, the world throws so much at us: information, emotions, pressure, unspoken expectations. And if we don't learn to filter, to choose, to protect our inner space, we'll slowly lose ourselves in the noise. We can't stop the outside world from spinning, but we can build something strong on the inside, a kind of inner fortress. A space in the mind where you have the power to choose what gets in and what stays out. Sounds ideal, right? But let's be honest, it's not easy. There will be days when you feel weak, overwhelmed, and let negativity seep in. That's okay. What matters is remembering you have the right to return to awareness. That's your real power, the ability to choose how you respond. Not control everything, that's impossible. But choose what you focus on, what you believe, what thoughts you feed. And the more you practice that, the stronger you become, internally. The strongest people aren't those who know everything. They're the ones who know what to let go of, what to hold on to, and what's worth protecting. That's the kind of strength that lasts. The kind that doesn't just help you survive, but helps you grow. So when the world gets too loud, when your own thoughts feel like they're spiraling out of control, pause. Take a breath. And remember, not everything deserves a place inside your mind. Not every thought deserves to stay. You have a choice. Every moment, every day, one brick at a time, one layer after another, you're building yourself. But how do you let go without becoming heartless? How do you love deeply without being consumed by emotion? These aren't just abstract questions. They echo inside us every time we face disappointment, heartache, or carry more than we should. Because when you give your all to something, a relationship, a dream, a cause, and it slips beyond your control, it's hard not to ask, how do I keep my heart open without it breaking every time things don't go my way? The problem is, most of us are taught from an early age that love means carrying the weight. That if you care, you have to take on their pain. If you commit, you must be glued to the outcome. But that kind of love becomes a trap. It blurs the line between compassion and control, between understanding and self-erasure. What starts as genuine care becomes an invisible prison, one made of guilt, anxiety, and silent resentment. Not because love is wrong. Love is beautiful. It's the most human thing we have. But love becomes harmful when it turns into attachment. When you start thinking your worth depends on fixing, pleasing, or saving others. And in the process, you forget yourself. You say yes when you mean no. You manage other people's emotions to avoid your own discomfort. You stay too long. You give more than you have. All in the name of love or loyalty. But what if letting go isn't abandonment? What if it's clarity? Plato once said, "The first and greatest victory is to conquer yourself." And to do that, you need to know where your love ends and another person's responsibility begins. Not to be cold or distant, but to protect your inner clarity. Because here's the truth, you can't carry someone else's growth. You can't force someone to heal, to change, to meet you where you are. You can only reach out and then take a step back. And that step back, it will feel strange at first, especially when your heart is fully invested. But you'll start to feel the difference between standing beside someone and dissolving into their struggle. One is connection. The other is emotional entanglement. And even though we romanticize that kind of fusion, it quietly erases our personal boundaries. Carl Jung called it individuation, the process of becoming a whole person. Not someone superior or isolated, but someone who stands in their own identity, who owns their emotions, their needs, their path, without needing to live life through someone else, without turning another person's pain into your identity. Letting go is often misunderstood. Many think it means not caring, being detached. But real letting go is a deeper kind of love. Love without control. Presence without enmeshment. Witnessing someone struggle without always jumping in to fix it. That's what emotional maturity looks like. You see, we grow up in a world that celebrates doing, fixing, solving. And so when someone we love is hurting, the natural urge is to jump in. to offer answers, to take on the burden. But what if the most powerful thing you can offer isn't a solution, but presence? What if your quiet, grounded being is more healing than your words ever could be? Because true presence doesn't rescue, it respects. It doesn't assume you know what someone else needs. It holds space for them to find their own way, in their own time. And that's hard, especially when you care deeply. Especially when everything in you wants to make the pain go away. But healing doesn't work that way. Growth doesn't work that way. No one becomes whole because someone else carried them. They become whole because they walked through their darkness and discovered light on the other side. And here's where journaling, yes, the simple act of writing, can quietly become one of your greatest tools. You might think journaling is just for artists or teenagers scribbling in diaries. But actually, it's one of the most powerful tools for self-awareness and inner peace. Because when thoughts live in your head, they swirl. They pretend to be fresh, when really they're old fears wearing new clothes. But the moment you write them down, suddenly they're not swirling anymore. You're not inside the thought, you're looking at it. That shift, going from participant to observer, is everything. Because when you see your thoughts clearly, they start to lose their grip. A fear that felt huge in your chest looks smaller in words. A judgment that seemed like truth suddenly reads like insecurity. A dream you've been burying quietly surfaces just because you gave it a place to land. Writing in its raw, unfiltered form helps you name what you're carrying. It helps you say what you haven't said out loud. It gives your emotions shape, your doubts form, your story edges. You get to ask, is this true? Do I believe this? Where did this belief come from? Socrates famously said, "The unexamined life is not worth living." And that doesn't mean reading ancient philosophy or quoting smart people. It means looking inward, deliberately, courageously. And writing is a path into that space. It makes you both the thinker and the observer. You begin to notice patterns, repetitions, old wounds you've avoided, but also moments of clarity, pieces of truth, tiny glimmers of who you really are beneath all the noise. And it's not just for the moments of insight. Writing is especially valuable in the mess. When you feel lost, confused, tangled. Because the act of writing, line by line, has a way of pulling those tangled threads into something coherent. You may not solve anything, but you'll name it. You'll acknowledge it. You'll create space for it. And in that space, healing starts. Aristotle once said, "The soul never thinks without a picture." And writing creates that picture. It brings form to the formless, voice to the quiet. It lets you see yourself, your hopes, your fears, your logic, your contradictions. And often what you find surprises you. You realize you've been carrying beliefs that don't even fit who you are anymore. You see feelings you never fully acknowledged. You uncover repeated choices that suddenly make sense once you trace their roots. But here's the thing, writing only works when you're honest. When you stop performing, stop curating, stop trying to sound wise or healed or poetic. When you just show up on the page as you, raw, uncertain, evolving. That's where the real stuff comes through. And strangely, once you make your thoughts visible, they stop haunting you. The anxiety that felt unbearable becomes a few sentences. The confusion that felt like drowning becomes a paragraph. The shame that used to hide finds the light and softens. Plato believed that knowledge is remembering, that what we call learning is often just a rediscovery of what the soul already knows. And writing is that process in action. You're not always finding new truths. Sometimes, you're just finally letting yourself say the old ones. The ones you buried under busyness, under shame, under distraction. The blank page becomes a mirror, a place to meet yourself again. Still, many people resist writing. They say, "I'm not a good writer," or "I don't know what to say," or "It feels weird." But here's the truth, that discomfort you feel? That's the threshold. That's where the work begins. You don't write because you have the answers. You write because you have the questions. You write to hear what your own mind sounds like without interruption. You write to see what happens when you stop editing your feelings in real time. The page doesn't judge you. It doesn't interrupt. It doesn't require you to make perfect sense. And that's what makes it sacred. It's one of the few places you can be fully honest, without consequences. You can say the things you're not ready to say out loud. You can be angry, confused, hopeful. And from that space, things begin to move. Carl Jung once said, "Solitude is a fountain of healing." And writing creates solitude, not isolation, but quiet space. A clearing in the mental noise. Place where you can sit, not with answers, but with yourself. And slowly, something shifts. You become less reactive, more thoughtful, more aware. You stop taking your thoughts at face value. You start asking, where did this thought come from? Is it mine? Is it helpful? Is it even true? That kind of awareness doesn't happen by accident. It happens through practice. Through showing up to the page even when the words are clumsy. Even when you don't feel like it. Even when it seems like nothing is happening. Because something is happening. You're teaching your mind to slow down. To reflect. To process. You're not just chasing insight. You're creating integration. And integration is where real change begins. It's not the aha moment. It's the slow building of a new foundation. One word, one truth, one line at a time. Insight is exciting. It's the lightning bolt, the sudden clarity. But insight without integration is just inspiration that fades. It makes you feel something, but doesn't always change how you live. Integration, on the other hand, is quieter, slower. It's the daily practice of weaving what you've learned into how you show up. It's the shift from knowing something to living it. From understanding your triggers to pausing before you react. From recognizing your worth to actually setting boundaries that honor it. And that's where writing becomes a kind of spiritual discipline. Not because it's dramatic or poetic, but because it helps you return to yourself again and again. In a world obsessed with speed, with noise, with the next thing, that act of sitting down with a blank page is a rebellion. It's saying, I will not be swept away today. I will make space. I will listen. I will pay attention. Because when you pay attention, you start to notice. Not just what's happening outside you, but what's shifting inside. The subtle ways your thoughts shape your emotions. The way certain beliefs keep you small. The way your self-talk affects your courage. That kind of awareness is power. And it's built in the quiet, not in the spotlight. Socrates once said, "Wisdom begins in wonder." And writing is an act of wonder. It's not about having the answers, it's about sitting with the questions. Letting them work on you. Letting them open doors you didn't know were closed. You don't have to write every day. You don't have to be eloquent. You just have to be honest. Write the truth as you know it. The messy, unfinished, uncomfortable truth. Write the things you're scared to say out loud. The things you're still figuring out. The things you wish weren't true but are. Because when you do that, you stop hiding. And when you stop hiding, something in you starts to breathe again. You reconnect with the parts of yourself that got buried. The dreams you shelved, the questions you stopped asking, the version of you that didn't need to perform. And that version? That's the one who can actually grow. The one who can heal. The one who can lead. Because growth doesn't happen when you're trying to impress. It happens when you're willing to be seen, first by yourself, and then maybe, eventually, by others. But let's talk about influence. Real influence. Because we live in a culture that tells us, speak louder, post more, be seen, be heard, be followed. That's how you make a difference, right? Not necessarily. You can have the perfect words, the strongest argument, the most passionate speech, and still not change anything. But because people don't just listen to what you say. They watch how you live. They're picking up on your energy, your tone, your integrity. They're asking, often unconsciously, does this person believe what they're saying? Do they live it when no one's watching? And that's where influence actually begins, not with persuasion, but with embodiment. When your actions align with your words, when your values show up in your habits, when you live what you believe, you become someone others can trust. Not because you're perfect, but because you're consistent. Plato once wrote that the soul naturally seeks what is good, beautiful, and true, but it needs to see it, not just hear about it. It needs examples, not just explanations. And that's your opportunity. You don't have to preach your values. You can live them. You don't have to convince people to change. You can show them what change looks like. You don't have to force agreement. You can offer an alternative. And often, that's more powerful than any argument. Think about the people who've impacted you the most. Was it because they always had the right answer? Or was it because they lived in a way that made you feel something deeper? Maybe they kept their word, even when it was hard. Maybe they stayed kind when others turned cruel. Maybe they carried themselves with a quiet confidence that made you think, I want that kind of peace. That's influence. Not the loud kind, the lived kind. Aristotle called it ethos, a person's character. And he believed that ethos was the most persuasive force in the world. Not because it wins debates, but because it earns trust. It shows what's possible. It bridges the gap between words and actions. And here's the truth. Most people aren't looking to be talked into something. They're looking for proof. Proof that kindness works. That discipline matters. That calm is stronger than chaos. That you can be soft and still powerful. That you can fail and still have worth. And when they see someone live those things, not perfectly, but sincerely, it plants a seed. It sparks a question, what if I lived like that? Carl Jung once said, you are what you do, not what you say you'll do. That cuts deep, doesn't it? Because it's easy to say the right things. It's harder to live them when it's inconvenient. When no one's clapping. When it costs you something. But that's where your real influence is forged. In the choices no one sees. In the habits you build. In the patience you offer. In the truth you tell yourself when it would be easier to lie. It's not about perfection. It's about alignment. When who you are matches what you say you value, you don't have to prove anything. You don't have to persuade. You just live, and people notice. Even if they don't agree with you, they'll trust you. Because consistency builds credibility. And the best part? When you stop needing to convince people, you also stop needing their approval. You become free. Free to focus on your growth. Free to lead by example. Free to trust that your life is speaking, even when your mouth is quiet. You stop trying to win arguments and start asking better questions. You shift from saying the truth to being the truth. And that kind of influence? It's unshakable. People may forget your words, but they won't forget how you made them feel. They won't forget your steadiness, your presence, your peace. That's legacy. Not built in a day, built in the daily. Let's be honest. We've all met people who talk a great game, eloquent, smart, even inspiring. But then something doesn't quite line up. Their actions tell a different story. Their energy feels off. And even if you can't explain it, you feel it. That's the thing about integrity. It's not something you say, it's something you feel. When there's a gap between who someone claims to be and how they actually live, trust breaks. Quietly but deeply. And once that trust breaks, no amount of pretty words can repair it. That's why true influence can't be faked. It's built slowly through alignment, through a life that reflects your values. And here's where it gets interesting. Influence isn't about being in the spotlight. It's not about going viral or being followed by thousands. It's about impact. Quiet, steady, lasting impact. The kind that happens in conversations no one records. In decisions no one claps for. In the way you treat people who can't offer you anything in return. Because people are always watching. Even when you think they aren't. They're watching how you react when you fail. How you speak to the waiter. How you handle criticism. How you show up on hard days. Those moments? They're your real message. Not the caption. Not the post. Not the perfectly crafted response. It's the life behind the words that speaks loudest. Aristotle once said, character may almost be called the most effective means of persuasion. That still holds true today. Character doesn't shout. It doesn't need to. It speaks through consistency, through discipline, through presence. And it doesn't mean you have to be flawless. In fact, perfection is the enemy of trust. What people connect with is honesty, vulnerability, growth. Someone who says, here's what I believe, and I'm trying my best to live it. That kind of authenticity, it resonates, it's rare, and it lasts. So what does it look like to actually live that way? It looks like being the same person whether the camera's on or off. It looks like making decisions that align with your values, even when they cost you something. It looks like owning your mistakes without excuses, like showing up for people without needing credit, like doing the right thing when it's hard, not just when it's easy. And slowly, over time, that kind of living becomes its own quiet influence. You don't have to push. You don't have to convince. People start to notice. They start to feel it. And whether they say anything or not, they're impacted. Something inside them shifts. Because you showed them it's possible. It's possible to be calm in chaos, kind in conflict, honest in a world that rewards performance. That's the kind of leadership that doesn't demand change, it invites it. Socrates once said, "Let him who would move the world first move himself." That might be one of the most important truths of all. You want to change the world? Start with you. Start with your habits, your self-talk, your responses, your daily choices. Not in isolation, not to withdraw from the world, but to become the kind of person who shows what's possible just by living. That's the shift from convincing to becoming, from trying to persuade others to simply embodying the message. Because when you live in alignment, something amazing happens. You stop needing everyone to understand. You stop needing constant validation. You can let people grow at their own pace because your peace doesn't depend on their agreement. That's freedom. That's power. That's influence at its deepest level. You see, we've been taught that influence is about convincing others to see things your way. But maybe real influence is about becoming someone who lives in a way that makes others want to understand themselves better. It's about being a mirror, not showing them your reflection, but helping them see their own. And here's the paradox. The more you try to control or convert people, the more they resist. But the more you focus on becoming, the more you draw people in, without force, without pressure, just by presence. Because presence speaks. And when your presence is rooted in clarity, humility, and courage, it creates a ripple effect. Quietly, powerfully. Carl Jung once said, "Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes." That's the shift. From performing to reflecting. From trying to change the world to becoming someone the world can't help but be changed by. And that work? It starts inside. It starts with the courage to sit with yourself, to ask the hard questions, to face the parts of you that still flinch in the dark. And then, not to fix them overnight, but to love them enough to stay with them, to stay with yourself. And from that space, a new kind of strength is born. Not the loud kind, not the sharp, aggressive kind, but the quiet, steady kind that stays standing even when life tries to knock you down. That's the goal. Not perfection, not applause, but steadiness, integrity, wholeness. Because the truth is, life isn't going to play fair. It won't always reward your effort. It won't always recognize your growth. Sometimes it'll break the rules, throw you off course, hit you when you're already down. And in those moments, the question won't be, did I win, or was I right? The question will be, did I stay true? Because life will take things from you. It'll take comfort, certainty, people you love, plans you made. But what it can't take, what it can never touch, is who you've become. And that's the real victory. That's the strength worth building. So maybe the question isn't, how do I convince more people? Maybe it's, how do I become someone who doesn't need to? Because when you become that person, when your values are in your bones, not just on your lips, you won't have to shout. You'll just live. And that life will echo. In ways you may never see. In people you may never meet. But it'll matter, because you'll have lived in truth. And truth, when embodied, is unshakable. Let's zoom out for a second. What if the goal in life isn't peace, or success, or even being a good person? What if the real goal is to become someone life cannot break? Sit with that. It flips everything you've probably been told. Because most of us grow up thinking the win is peace, comfort, approval. We chase this idea that one day, we'll arrive at a life that's finally calm, finally figured out, finally secure. But life doesn't work that way. It doesn't follow your timeline. It doesn't reward effort fairly. It doesn't care about how good or honest or kind you've been. Life will test you. It will hit you when you're already low. It will pull the rug out just when things feel steady. And in those moments, the question is no longer, did I reach peace? Or, was I successful? The real question becomes, can I still stand? That's the real strength. Not in avoiding pain, but in not letting it undo you. To be someone that life can't break doesn't mean becoming emotionless. It doesn't mean being hardened or untouchable. It means staying whole through the fire, staying true to yourself in spite of the chaos. That's a deeper kind of resilience. One that's built, not born. Carl Jung said it best, I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become. What happens to you? That's circumstance. What you become because of it. That's character. And let's be real, life will give you every reason to compromise. Every reason to shrink, to give up, to numb out, to harden. And if you're not grounded, you'll bend. Or worse, you'll break. But if your foundation is strong, if it's built on values you live, not just speak, you'll bend, but you won't shatter. Plato believed the soul grows stronger through struggle, that we gain real clarity only when life gets messy. And honestly, that tracks. Because it's easy to believe in hope when things are going well. It's harder when everything's falling apart. But those are the moments that define you. Not the wins. Not the applause. The losses. The setbacks. The silence. That's where your soul shows up. And if you've done the inner work, if you've stayed with yourself through the small trials, the quiet doubts, the daily decisions that no one claps for, then you'll have something solid to stand on. Because real strength isn't built when things are easy. It's built when you keep your word even when it costs you. When you hold the line even when no one's watching. When you stay soft in a hard moment and don't let bitterness take root. And let's talk about integrity for a second. Integrity isn't about being perfect. It's about being complete. It's about wholeness. About congruence between who you say you are and how you actually show up. And when you build that kind of inner alignment, the outside world starts to lose its grip. You stop needing praise to feel valuable. You stop needing control to feel safe. You stop chasing every shiny thing because you've already found something solid inside. That's why the goal isn't ease. It's not applause. It's becoming someone who remains whole, even when the world feels like it's breaking apart. Aristotle once said that virtue lives in the balance, between recklessness and cowardice, between indulgence and deprivation. That's what courage looks like. Not the absence of fear, but the strength to act anyway. And that kind of courage? It comes from living in alignment. It comes from waking up and choosing, again and again, to honor your values, even when no one's around to see it. Even when it would be easier not to. It's the voice inside that says, this is who I am. And I'm not abandoning that, no matter how loud life gets. Because when everything is stripped away, titles, status, followers, achievements, the only thing you really own is your character. And if that character has been built honestly, layer by layer, through patience, through discipline, through showing up on the hard days, then life can shake the surface, but it can't crack the core. That's what makes you unbreakable. Not untouchable. Not numb. Just deeply, unwaveringly whole. Socrates said, no evil can happen to a good man either in life or after death. That doesn't mean bad things won't happen. They will. But real harm? Harm that breaks your soul? That only happens when you betray yourself. When you trade what you know is right for what's easy. When you silence your own truth in exchange for comfort or approval. That's the danger. Not the pain. Not the loss. But the compromise. Because every time you choose to ignore that voice inside, every time you choose comfort over alignment, you chip away at your own foundation. And yes, sometimes life will reward you for it. In the short term. But deep down, you'll feel it. You'll know when you've stepped out of integrity. And no amount of success or applause will quiet that dissonance. That's why the work is so important. The quiet, boring, relentless work of becoming someone you can trust. Someone who doesn't fold when things get hard. Someone who doesn't need everyone to understand or agree, because they've already done the inner alignment. Because once you have that, the world can't control you. Opinions won't shake you. Failure won't define you. Chaos won't collapse you. You'll still feel things, deeply, but you'll be rooted. And in that rootedness, you'll lead. Not with a loud voice, but with a steady presence. So what does it really look like to build that kind of strength? It's not some cinematic training montage. There's no epic soundtrack, no spotlight, no grand reveal. It looks like showing up in the small, mundane moments. Choosing discipline when chaos feels easier. Holding your word when no one would blame you for walking away. Getting back up when life knocks you flat, and doing it without bitterness. That's the training. And it's not glamorous. It's not quick, but it's real. And it's where true resilience is formed. It happens in the early mornings when you want to give up. In the conversations where your heart is stretched. In the silence when there's no reward, just the decision to keep going anyway. And over time, that quiet commitment builds something unshakable. A center, core, a groundedness that doesn't disappear when pressure rises. You might still flinch, still feel fear, still stumble, but you don't get lost in it anymore. You don't drown in the noise, because now you know who you are. You've seen yourself in the fire, and you didn't run. Aristotle taught that character is a habit. It's not a moment, not a single choice. It's a way of being that's shaped by repetition. Courage isn't the one brave act you did 5 years ago. It's what you choose today and tomorrow and the day after that. And you build it not by waiting for perfect conditions, but by acting in imperfect ones. You grow it by staying centered when you're tired, by speaking gently when you're angry, by telling the truth even when it makes you shake. That's how you become someone who doesn't fold under pressure. Someone who stays soft without falling apart. Strong without shutting down. Someone who bends, but doesn't break. Carl Jung believed the goal of life wasn't perfection, it was wholeness. And that changes everything. Because if you're chasing perfection, every flaw feels like failure. Every mistake becomes shame. Every detour feels like you're falling behind. But if you're pursuing wholeness, then all of it belongs. The fear, the flaws, the doubts, the dreams, they're part of the story. Not things to hide, but parts to integrate. That's what makes you steady. Not because life gets easier, but because you stop fighting your humanity. You don't have to perform peace, you create it inside. You don't have to chase success, you define it on your terms. You don't have to pretend you're fearless, you learn how to walk with fear. And in that space, you become unshakable. Not in the superhero way, not in the nothing hurts me kind of way, but in the I know who I am even when I'm hurting kind of way. That's strength. That's maturity. That's influence. Because now, the storm doesn't define you, it reveals you. It shows what you've built. And if you've built wisely, with patience, with integrity, with awareness, then you'll be able to stand. Maybe trembling, maybe tired, but standing. And that alone? That's victory. You see, we spend so much time chasing the external. More money, more followers, more validation, more control. But those things are fragile. They can be taken. They can vanish overnight. What can't be taken is who you've become. That's why the real question isn't, how do I get what I want out of life? It's, how do I become the kind of person who stays whole no matter what life takes? Because when you become that person, you don't just survive chaos. You lead through it. You don't just hold on. You light the way. You become someone who doesn't need certainty to keep moving. Someone who doesn't need comfort to stay kind. Someone who doesn't need everything to go right in order to do what's right. And that's rare. That's powerful. You become a steady presence in a world that's constantly shifting. And people feel that. Even if they don't say it, even if they can't explain it, they feel it. There's something different about someone who's done their inner work. Someone who's faced their fear, made peace with their flaws, and learned to walk through fire without losing their soul. That kind of person doesn't need to prove anything. They are the proof. They don't need to argue their values. They live them. And that's the kind of influence that changes things. Quietly, consistently. It's the kind of influence that transforms relationships, families, communities, because it comes from within. From someone who's not chasing power, but rooted in presence. From someone who's not obsessed with being seen, but committed to being solid. From someone who doesn't need applause, because they've already earned their own respect. And maybe that's the win. Not fame, not perfection, but becoming someone whose peace doesn't depend on what happens next. Because life will keep happening. The highs, the lows, the curveballs, the unexpected heartbreaks. You can't control all of it, but you can control how you meet it. And when you've trained yourself to meet it with courage, with grace, with clarity, then you've already won. You're no longer just reacting to life, you're shaping it from the inside out. And that ripple? It goes further than you know. Let's go even deeper. When you become someone who stands strong, not in ego but in groundedness, you change how you move through the world. It's not just about how you feel anymore. It's about the quiet impact you start having on others. Because here's the truth, people are watching. Even when they're not saying anything, even when it seems like no one's paying attention, they notice. They notice how you carry yourself during conflict. They notice how you treat the person who can't benefit you. They notice whether you keep your word, even when it's inconvenient. They notice when you choose kindness over cleverness, silence over shouting, humility over grandstanding. And those small choices, they echo. They leave a mark. Not because you're trying to impress anyone, but because that kind of integrity is rare. It's magnetic. We live in a time where visibility is everything, where people are constantly trying to be seen, louder voices, more content, bolder statements. But the strongest presence in the room is usually the one that isn't screaming for attention. It's the one that's centered, steady, unmoved by noise. That's the person people remember. That's the person people look to, not because they're flashy, but because they're real. And that kind of presence is built over time. It's built by choosing honesty when image would be easier. It's built by showing restraint when anger would be justified. It's built by doing the right thing when no one's watching. That's where influence is forged, in the moments that feel invisible. Because here's the thing, real influence isn't about convincing others. It's about becoming someone who doesn't need to. It's the difference between forcing and inviting, between pushing your message and embodying it. People don't change because you argued better. They change because they saw something in you that made them believe change was possible. That's powerful. And it has nothing to do with being perfect. It has everything to do with being authentic, consistently. Plato once said that the soul naturally seeks what is good, true, and beautiful. But it needs to see it, not in theory but in practice, in people, in examples, in lives that reflect the ideals they talk about. So ask yourself, what are you showing the people around you? Not what are you preaching? Not what are you posting? What are you living? Because people are listening to your life far more than they're listening to your words. And your life is speaking all the time, through the way you show up, the way you listen, the way you handle pressure and loss and stress and success, through the way you treat the ones who can't give you anything. Those are the sermons that stick. Those are the truths that people feel. And in that way, your presence becomes a mirror for others. Not to judge them, but to remind them of their own strength, their own standards, their own longing to live with more clarity and courage. You become the proof that it's possible. That kindness doesn't have to be weakness. That calm doesn't mean you're checked out. That being grounded is more powerful than being loud. And that reminder? It's a gift. But again, it doesn't come from a spotlight. It comes from your alignment, from your quiet consistency, from the work you've done in private, the tears you've cried without telling anyone, the hours you've spent sorting your mind out on paper, the hard truths you've faced in solitude. That's what makes your presence weighty. That's what gives you depth. You can't fake that. Carl Jung once said, "Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes." That's the work most people avoid. Because it's uncomfortable. It's slow. It doesn't give instant results. But it's the work that actually changes you. And when you've done it, when you've spent time looking inward, understanding your fears, your motivations, your tendencies, you start moving through the world differently. You're not triggered as easily. You're not desperate for validation. You're not afraid of discomfort because you've made peace with being uncomfortable. You stop trying to fix everyone else and instead focus on becoming someone worth emulating. That shift is everything because now your energy speaks louder than your words. You walk into a room and people feel something they can't name, but they want more of it. They feel your presence, your steadiness, your clarity. And slowly, they start to ask themselves better questions. Could I live like that? What would it take to build that kind of inner peace? That kind of strength? That kind of self-trust? And that's when the real transformation begins. Not because you told them to change, but because you showed them it was possible. That's what leadership really is. It's not about having all the answers. It's about being willing to live the questions out loud with integrity over time. It's about staying committed to growth even when no one sees it. It's about refusing to settle even when it would be easier. Because the truth is, most people don't need another argument. They need an example. They need someone who shows them what's real, what's possible, what's true. And you can become that, not by performing, not by being perfect, but by doing the work, by showing up, by living your values so clearly that no one has to ask what you believe. They feel it. Let's go even deeper. When you become someone who stands strong, not in ego but in groundedness, you change how you move through the world. It's not just about how you feel anymore. It's about the quiet impact you start having on others. Because here's the truth, people are watching. Even when they're not saying anything, even when it seems like no one's paying attention, they notice. They notice how you carry yourself during conflict. They notice how you treat the person who can't benefit you. They notice whether you keep your word, even when it's inconvenient. They notice when you choose kindness over cleverness, silence over shouting, humility over grandstanding. And those small choices, they echo. They leave a mark. Not because you're trying to impress anyone, but because that kind of integrity is rare. It's magnetic. We live in a time where visibility is everything. Where people are constantly trying to be seen, louder voices, more content, bolder statements. But the strongest presence in the room is usually the one that isn't screaming for attention. It's the one that's centered, steady, unmoved by noise. That's the person people remember. That's the person people look to, not because they're flashy, but because they're real. And that kind of presence is built over time. It's built by choosing honesty when image would be easier. It's built by showing restraint when anger would be justified. It's built by doing the right thing when no one's watching. That's where influence is forged, in the moments that feel invisible. Because here's the thing. Real influence isn't about convincing others. It's about becoming someone who doesn't need to. It's the difference between forcing and inviting, between pushing your message and embodying it. People don't change because you argued better. They change because they saw something in you that made them believe change was possible. That's powerful. And it has nothing to do with being perfect. It has everything to do with being authentic, consistently. Plato once said that the soul naturally seeks what is good, true, and beautiful. But it needs to see it, not in theory but in practice. In people, in examples, in lives that reflect the ideals they talk about. So ask yourself, what are you showing the people around you? Not what are you preaching? Not what are you posting? What are you living? Because people are listening to your life far more than they're listening to your words. And your life is speaking all the time. Through the way you show up, the way you listen, the way you handle pressure and loss and stress and success. Through the way you treat the ones who can't give you anything. Those are the sermons that stick. Those are the truths that people feel. And in that way, your presence becomes a mirror for others. Not to judge them, but to remind them. To remind them of their own strength, their own standards, their own longing to live with more clarity and courage. You become the proof that it's possible. That kindness doesn't have to be weakness. That calm doesn't mean you're checked out. That being grounded is more powerful than being loud. And that reminder? It's a gift. But again, it doesn't come from a spotlight. It comes from your alignment, from your quiet consistency, from the work you've done in private. The tears you've cried without telling anyone, the hours you've spent sorting your mind out on paper, the hard truths you've faced in solitude. That's what makes your presence weighty. That's what gives you depth. You can't fake that. Carl Jung once said, "Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes." That's the work most people avoid. Because it's uncomfortable. It's slow. It doesn't give instant results. But it's the work that actually changes you. And when you've done it, when you've spent time looking inward, understanding your fears, your motivations, your tendencies, you start moving through the world differently. You're not triggered as easily. You're not desperate for validation. You're not afraid of discomfort because you've made peace with being uncomfortable. You stop trying to fix everyone else and instead focus on becoming someone worth emulating. That shift is everything, because now your energy speaks louder than your words. You walk into a room and people feel something they can't name, but they want more of it. They feel your presence, your steadiness, your clarity, and slowly they start to ask themselves better questions. Could I live like that? What would it take to build that kind of inner peace? That kind of strength? That kind of self-trust? And that's when the real transformation begins. Not because you told them to change, but because you showed them it was possible. That's what leadership really is. It's not about having all the answers. It's about being willing to live the questions out loud with integrity over time. It's about staying committed to growth even when no one sees it. It's about refusing to settle even when it would be easier. Because the truth is, most people don't need another argument. They need an example. They need someone who shows them what's real, what's possible, what's true. And you can become that, not by performing, not by being perfect, but by doing the work, by showing up, by living your values so clearly that no one has to ask what you believe. They feel it. Let's talk about becoming unbreakable. Not in the sense of being untouchable or hardened by life, but in the deeper, quieter way, where no matter what happens, you stay whole. Because here's what no one tells you early on: life will try to break you. Not out of cruelty, but simply because that's what life does. It challenges, it bends, it exposes, it strips away anything weak, anything false, anything built on sand. And in those moments, when the plan fails, when the relationship ends, when the job disappears, when the storm hits hard, you don't rise or fall based on how much success you've had. You rise or fall based on who you've become. That's why the goal isn't perfection. It's resilience. It's not about being untouched by pain. It's about being able to feel it fully and still stand. Carl Jung once said, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." That's the mindset of someone who's done the work, who's faced loss, heartbreak, confusion, and still chose growth. Still chose integrity. Still chose to show up. And if you're listening to this, odds are you've been through some things. Things that left scars. Things that shook your faith in people, maybe even in yourself. But you're still here. That means something. That means you didn't give up. That means you're stronger than you think. But let's take that strength deeper. Let's turn it into something unshakable. By asking better questions. Not, why did this happen to me? But what can I build from here? Not, how do I get back to who I was? But, who am I now, and who do I want to become? These are the questions that rebuild you. These are the questions that forge character. Because real strength, the kind that lasts, is built in the aftermath. After the fall. After the silence. After the apology you never got. After the door that closed. After the chapter that ended too soon. That's where you meet yourself. That's where you learn what's real. And sometimes it's messy. You'll feel lost. You'll doubt yourself. You'll wonder if you're making any progress at all. But you are. Because every time you choose to stay grounded instead of reactive, every time you journal your thoughts instead of suppressing them, every time you pick up the pieces instead of blaming the world, you're growing. Quietly. Steadily. Unseen maybe, but undeniably. And that kind of growth? It changes you. It changes how you respond to stress. It changes how you hold space for others. It changes how you treat yourself when you fall short. You stop needing to win all the time. You stop needing to be right. You stop looking for external validation to feel okay. Instead, you anchor yourself in values, in truth, in clarity. Because now, you're not just surviving life, you're leading yourself through it. That's a different kind of power. It's not loud. It's not performative. It's the kind of power that shows up in how you talk to yourself after a failure, in how you breathe through discomfort instead of numbing it, in how you walk into a hard conversation with your heart open, not because it's easy, but because it's true. And that power? It's forged over time, through repetition, through practice, through the decision over and over again to not betray yourself, even when it would be easier to. Aristotle once said that courage is the balance between recklessness and cowardice. And that's what we're talking about here, the balance. The daily work of staying centered, even in chaos. The ability to sit with your fear, not deny it, not let it control you, but to walk with it anyway. Because courage doesn't mean you feel ready. It means you move even when you don't. And you build that courage the same way you build muscle, through consistent use. One honest conversation at a time. One choice to stay when you want to run. One moment of stillness when everything in you wants to react. That's how it grows. And here's what's beautiful. The more you practice, the more you realize you've been strong this whole time. You've just been distracted by noise, by expectations, by fear. But under all of that, you've always had the capacity to be whole. You've always had the ability to stand tall, even after life knocked you flat. You just needed to remember that peace isn't found. It's created. That confidence isn't something you're given. It's something you earn, through keeping promises to yourself. That wisdom isn't downloaded. It's cultivated, through reflection, failure, and time. And that's the invitation. To stop chasing what the world tells you to want, and start building something deeper. A foundation, core, a character that doesn't collapse under pressure. Because life will keep testing you. It will keep asking, are you serious about this? And your response won't be in your words. It'll be in your consistency, in how you carry yourself, in how you treat others when you're tired, stressed, overlooked, in how you come home to your values when it would be easier to let them slide. That's the test. That's the work. And it's worth it. Because when you do that work long enough, something shifts. You stop being afraid of hard seasons. You stop being surprised when things fall apart. You start seeing those moments as refiners, not punishments. You start asking, what part of me is being strengthened right now? And suddenly, the chaos doesn't feel like the enemy. It feels like the forge, the place where your next level is being shaped. There's something powerful about realizing that storms don't destroy you, they reveal you. That what felt like the end of everything was actually the beginning of a deeper version of you. One with more wisdom, more compassion, more strength. Not because you avoided pain, but because you moved through it with your eyes open. That's the kind of transformation we rarely talk about. Because we're taught to chase peace, success, validation, as if those things are the endgame. But what if they're not? What if the real goal is to become the kind of person life can't break? The kind who still shows up with kindness even after betrayal. The kind who still speaks truth even when it costs something. The kind who still believes in growth even when the path is painful. Carl Jung said that wholeness, not perfection, is the goal of life. And wholeness means integration. It means taking all the pieces of you, the strong, the scared, the wise, the insecure, and holding space for all of it. Not denying your shadow. Not pretending to have it all figured out. But owning your complexity. Sitting in the tension. Being honest about your contradictions. Because healing doesn't mean becoming someone else. It means coming home to who you really are. And that home, that inner alignment, it gives you something the world can't touch. It gives you a kind of peace that isn't shaken by someone else's misunderstanding. A kind of confidence that doesn't rely on applause. A kind of clarity that lets you navigate chaos without losing yourself. That's what we're aiming for. Not immunity from life, but resilience within it. Not a life without struggle, but a self that stays steady inside the struggle. And that self? It's built, line by line, choice by choice, through the daily work of writing down your thoughts instead of hiding from them, through pausing before you react, so you can respond instead, through asking not what do I want to say, but who do I want to be right now? That work is subtle. It doesn't always get celebrated, but it compounds. And over time, it builds something unshakable. The version of you who can sit in silence and hear your own voice. The version of you who doesn't need constant feedback to stay steady. The version of you who leads, not by shouting, but by living. Because leadership isn't about followers. It's about alignment, about choosing your values, and then embodying them when it's hard, when it's inconvenient, when no one's watching. That's influence. That's what actually shapes people. Not a perfect speech, not a viral post, but a consistent presence. A life that whispers, "It's possible. You can live like this too." Socrates said, "Let him who would move the world first move himself." That's the message. That before we try to fix others, or argue them into our point of view, or build platforms to broadcast truth, we begin by living that truth. Even if no one sees it, even if no one agrees yet. Because the most powerful message isn't something you say. It's who you are. When your life aligns with your beliefs, you don't have to convince anyone. You become the proof. You become the invitation. And that changes everything. Not overnight. Not with fireworks. But slowly, quietly, day by day. You walk differently. You speak differently. You stop needing to prove, or defend, or chase. Because your life is already speaking. And what it's saying is clear. I've done the work. I know who I am. I'm not trying to win. I'm trying to live well. That kind of presence, rooted, grounded, honest, it's magnetic. People feel it. Even if they don't know why, they remember it. Because it's rare. And in a world full of noise, alignment feels like silence. Like a breath of fresh air. Like something true. So if you're still wondering where to start with honesty. Start by showing up on the page, not to sound smart, but to hear yourself. Start by naming what hurts. What confuses you. What you've been carrying in silence. Start by writing not to be read, but to see. To see what you believe. To see what you fear. To see what you're avoiding and what you're still hoping for. Because when you see it, you can change it. And when you change it, you change you. Not by becoming someone else, but by finally becoming yourself, unfiltered, awake, aligned. That's where all the power is. So here's the final question. Do you know your thoughts, or do you just live inside them? Because there's a blank page waiting. And it doesn't need you to be perfect. It just needs you to begin. To lay it down. To look inside. To write the truth, not the version that sounds good, but the one that feels real. And from that place, transformation begins. Not through force. Not through performance. But through presence. Through honesty. Through the quiet power of becoming someone life cannot break. Because at the end of the day, that's the real victory. Not what you achieve. Not what you post. Not how loud you can shout. But who you are when everything is quiet. When the world isn't looking. When all you have is your breath, your values, and the page in front of you. That's when it counts. That's where it begins. So start. Start now. Because the future? It's already yours.